Chapter 17, title, Manifest Destiny and Its Legacy. Let's talk a little bit about what manifest destiny means. Manifest destiny means was a phrase during the 1800s, mid 1800s, that meant that many people believed that it was God's will that the United States stretch from sea to shining sea, from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific. There's still a lot of land left that's in the hands of Mexico during this time. So it would require the acquisition of that land, be it by treaty or by war. So people were beginning to talk about that. It's our destiny to spread from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Obviously, we know that it is eventually achieved. So we've been talking about westward movement for quite some time now. The window in time theory, the power of the West. You saw it with the war hawks, forcing a war upon a country that really didn't want a war, fighting against another country, England, that really didn't want that war either, but they were able to manufacture that war and win it or tie it, depending on how you look at it, status quo antebellum. So the power of the West, the window in time. So the march west continued. This painting right here, titled American Progress by John Gast, he painted it in 1872, depicts manifest destiny. You could see that the angel has a Bible in her hand. She's flying into the light that's supposed to represent west. She has in her hand the lines that for the telegraph, progress. You also see a number of people that are moving west, whether it be farmers here that are tilling the soil with their oxen. Here you have miners. So you have a pick and shovel here. They're going out mining for gold. You have Native Americans that appear to be running because they're being pushed by these groups. You have progress in the form of the covered wagon. You have the railroads coming, and more covered wagons here. So you have the buffalo moving west. So there's a lot in this painting. Also, you see the storm in the east, stormy clouds, and she's flying into the light, supposedly out west. Let's talk a little bit about William Henry Harrison. If you remember, William Henry Harrison was the hero of the Battle of Tippecanoe. He was the one who went into Indiana and forced the Indians out, defeated Tecumseh. And then, this is going to catapult him to the presidency. Just as down the line, Andrew Jackson's exploits at New Orleans are going to catapult him to the presidency. It was thought that if you could command an army, you could command the country. So people like George Washington, our first president, was, a military hero. So William Henry Harrison is going to take the torch now as president, but he's not going to take the torch for very long. As a matter of fact, 29 days as president before he succumbs to pneumonia. He actually it goes on record as having the longest inauguration speech in history. I can't remember the length, but it was long. He had a cold at the time. It was snowing. It was the temperature was very low. The cold turned into pneumonia, and the pneumonia eventually killed him 29 days after that inauguration speech. So he was pretty much bedridden his entire 29 days as president. William Henry Harrison's his running mate was John Tyler. John Tyler, interestingly enough, was a guy who really didn't fit the rest of the party. We'll talk about that in a second here. But the other thing you need to know about the whole ticket of Harrison and Tyler is this is the first ever slogan in political American history, and they called it Tippecanoe and Tyler too, their campaign slogan. So Tippecanoe was the nickname of William Henry Harrison, and Tyler, being his vice presidential running mate, was Tyler too. And Tyler too was going to become president really quickly. So a little bit about John Tyler. He's a former Democrat now who turned to the Whig Party. So the other thing about William Henry Harrison, if you remember from a couple chapters ago, is he won the presidency under the title of Whig. He's a Whig Whig member of the Whig Party. Remember, the Whig Party is a party that hated Andrew Jackson. Now, here's where John Tyler, interestingly enough, was a former Democrat who really did hate Andrew Jackson and couldn't handle him anymore and jumped ship to the other party. You're beginning to see, or you have been seeing that all along, enough so that he's voted out of office. But President Trump has a lot of people that dislike him, and there were Republicans that jumped ship and said, I can't take it, the party anymore, because you follow someone like Trump. And that was quite a few people have left the Republican Party because of it. So think about it along those lines. John Tyler was a Democrat who hated Jackson, and he jumped to the Whig Party, because if you remember, the Whig Party, the common bond, the glue that held that party together was hatred of one man, and that was Andrew Jackson. It was the old National Republicans that welcomed in a lot of people like John Tyler. So they just changed their name to, as you remember, if you remember this, the Whig Party, because the Whig Party in England was the party that opposed the king. And so they called him King Andrew I because he acted like a dictator. So that's where the name Whig comes from. But here's the deal with John Tyler is he was against everything that the Whigs were for. The Whigs, of course, their leader was Henry Clay. And we know Henry Clay was the guy who came up with the idea of the American system, which was national bank protective tariff and internal improvements. So being the party, the party leader, Henry Clay, he promoted that within the Whig Party. So John Tyler comes in, and he's anti-national bank, he's anti-protective tariff, and he's anti-internal improvements. Remember, John Tyler, he's a Southerner. He's from Virginia. He's a slave owner. He's all about states' rights. So internal improvements meant, government could give us money, then they could take our slaves away. So that's the way he thought. The entire Harrison cabinet all resigned because they didn't like John Tyler, except for one. Daniel Webster was the only one who stayed as Secretary of State. Everybody else said, we're out. We don't like this guy. So rough presidency for him to get at the beginning of the presidency here. And he's really not going to be renominated by the party to run for a second term. He had 15 children, by the way, the most of any president. Want to mention briefly that there are still some conflicts up the border between British-controlled Canada and America. Yes, we did fight the War of 1812, but there's still some issues between us and them, meaning us and the British. There's a border conflict up here. So if you could see up on this map here, the Canadians were building a road that went from the Atlantic Ocean to Quebec. There's a way you can get there, but the preferred way at this time was via boat down the St. Lawrence River to get to Quebec. They wanted a road that would go through. Well, it just so happened they start building this road, and it's going through what the people up in Maine believe that is their property. So there was a big conflict. There were shots fired. It could have evolved into a war between the United States and Great Britain, but calmer heads prevailed, and they came up with a treaty known as the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty allowed for the handing over of this property in Maine to Canada in return for territory over here, which would be part of Minnesota. So an expansion of this territory in this area here. And the reason that the United States was interested in that territory is the mining of coal. So that would give them more access to that. So it was a trade. We gave Canada this, they gave us that, and we avoided war. And you're starting to see the map start to take shape, the map that we have today. Okay, so let's talk about Texas now. Texas has been there for 9 years as an independent country. The United States refused to take them in because of fear of war with Mexico, which they would rather trade with Mexico and not fight them. And they're also worried that that Texas coming in would upset the balance between the free and slave states, all this territory. So when you think of Texas, think of it not as the state of Texas today, because the Texas territory included much more territory than just that. I'll show you maps here in a few minutes. So once again, Texas is there 9 years on their own, an independent republic. It's their own country, the Lone Star Republic. That's why you have the single star on the map today in their state map. Excuse me, on the state flag, they have a star. On the Cowboys helmet, they have a star. Texas has always embraced that now that, hey, we were on our own. We were our own country for a while. Remember the whole Texas War, the one that ended with the Alamo. So what Texans definitely want to be part of the United States. Texans want to be and are pleading with the United States to take them in. The United States continues to say no until Texas started to negotiate with Great Britain and France and other countries that they said, hey, we need help. We need financial support. We need military support. So they started, negotiating with British and negotiating with the French. And this piqued the United States interest. That's what got them to finally say, all right, enough is enough. We're going to take Texas in, because having Great Britain or France or any other European country in our backyard would be a violation of the Monroe Doctrine from 1823, which said that no European country could colonize in the Americas. So we were not going to let that happen at the time. So Texas was smart to do that. They knew that the United States wouldn't like it if they started negotiating with, especially the British. So that's when the wheel started turning toward annexation of Texas after they negotiated with the British. So, there's definitely some push to that. And we'll talk about James K. Polk's desire to have Texas in the next election here. So let's talk about this really, really important election of 1844, the election of James K. Polk, who was a dark horse candidate. No one ever really, that before this, knew who the heck James K. Polk from Tennessee was. He's a Westerner, not well known. He's going up against quite possibly the most well-known politician at the time, Henry Clay. So Henry Clay, as you know, this is time number 3. This is the third time Henry Clay is running for the presidency. The first 2 times ended in defeat for him. We know the disputed election of 1824 with the corrupt bargain, when he gave it through his support. He was last in that election out of the 4 candidates, and he happened to be Speaker of the House, and he threw his support to John Quincy Adams, and he won the presidency. And Jackson was upset with that, very, very upset with that. So anyway, Henry Clay then tried to defeat Jackson in 1832. And remember how popular Jackson was, and he tried to do the bank scheme, tried to force through a rechartering of the bank, and Jackson just vetoed it and then wrote the long letter. Everybody supported him, and Jackson ends up winning that election. This is the third time, and this is his best chance. He really, really would have to screw things up in the election of 1844 to lose, because everybody knew who Henry Clay was. Nobody knew who James K. Polk was. So the Whigs nominate their leader, Henry Clay. The Democrats nominate Westerner. They called him Young Hickory because he reminded people of Andrew Jackson. And here's the thing James K. Polk did. He came up with what became, what many people thought was a brilliant idea, enough that he's going to win this election. James K. Polk says, look, we are going to annex Texas, and then we are also going to annex the Oregon Territory, which was territory that was jointly owned between the United States and Great Britain. And here's his rationale, that whenever we add a state from the Texas Territory, we'll match it up with the state from the Oregon Territory, and we'll keep the balance between the free and slave states. So it would take care of that problem. Well, people started, buying into his plan, and people were excited about it. So much so that Henry Clay said, yeah, if I were president, I would do the same thing. I would annex Texas and the Oregon Territory. Oh man, that's probably the worst thing he could have done, because the Democrats then quickly dug up speeches that Henry Clay had given about being anti-expansion. There was times when he was anti-expansion and gave speeches about that. Well, they publicized them, and the worst thing you could be if you're running for office is a guy who's a floater and goes both ways and says one thing one time and then something else another time. So people in the United States bought into James K. Polk's plan to annex both territories, and there you go. In the election, when it comes to the electoral vote, he ends up, James K. Polk wins 62 to 38%. Now, when it comes to the popular vote, you know, it was pretty close, 50 to 48, with a third-party candidate getting the 2%. But in the end, it really matters what happens right here in the Electoral College, 62 to 38 for James K. Polk. Henry Clay done as a presidential candidate. He's going to have one more contribution to history that's going to avert Civil War, and it's going to be another compromise. Shocking. He's known as the great compromiser in history. All right. So the annexation of Texas happened. He argued for it. It eventually came to fruition. And the other area was this. I think this is a better map. Sorry, this map. I wanted to jump to this map right here. This map right here is a little better representation of the Oregon Territory. It's all this area here, plus, if America got their way, all this area up here too. So the Americans demanded 5440 or fight. Those are coordinates on the map. 5440 would be all the way up here. Just so you could, you know, to put it in context, here is Alaska right up here. So if America got their way and it was 5440 or fight, we want all this territory here, or we're willing to fight against the British again. The British said, no, we're not going to let that happen. We'll allow it to the 49th parallel, right? We'll just extend the 49th parallel that was 1819 treaty. We'll let it go all the way to here. And they agreed on that. Calmer heads prevail, and they compromised at the 49th parallel. So the Oregon Territory was not just Oregon. It was Oregon, it was Washington, it was Idaho, and it was part of Montana here. That was the Oregon Territory. All right. So not only did they annex the Texas territory, but they also annexed the Oregon Territory. Now, the thing about Texas territory is there's no way that you're going to have that the Mexico is going to approve that. Mexico still believes Texas is part of their country. So you got some big time issues there. And this is the picture I was showing you here, is the number of people, the people that were going from Independence, Missouri, and coming across, going on the Oregon Trail. Many of you probably played that game in elementary school, the Oregon Trail, the trek across the Midwest all the way to Oregon, as Oregon was, especially the Willamette Valley here, very fertile land in that territory. So they'd come across in horse and buggy like that. All right, there's the compromise. And I'll talk more about James K. Polk in part 2.